So after reading the article on the genetics-based methods for agricultural pest management, some of the key highlights that were talked about with regards to some of the techniques and methods that were put on display from a genetics-based standpoint, as well as an ecological standpoint. They talk about the economics that were involved in some of these methods that they're trying to implement to protect our crops, and some of these insects they highlighted in the intro, particularly were the pink bollworm, which is a pest towards cotton, the Mediterranean fruit fly, which is a pest towards about 250 different host plants, and a big one that they highlighted was the diamondback moth, which is particularly finds a liking to vegetable and oil seed crops, and these particular insects actually cause about $4 to $5 billion worth of damage towards crops and upkeep per annum. So what geneticists have developed are Bt toxins, which defend against these moths, since they are actually very resistant to other insecticides that have been used and put onto the crops, just to benefit economically and agriculturally, so we're not losing so much of these crops per annum. So through theoretical analysis, they were considering the ecological, like I said, and genetics for this pest management. One of the techniques they used was the sterile insect technique, which relies on biology rather than chemistry, which is very interesting. And what they do is they actually implement sterile insects into the ecosystem that will in fact reduce the amount of resistant insects in that particular ecosystem by creating a heterozygote that they will be able to study. And this technique's best suited when there's one particular pest that is under study or under focus in a particular ecosystem. And then this method has actually been very beneficial towards freeing globally from the screwworm in agricultural life, as well as not depleting completely, but reducing the amount of mosquitoes that have been producing harmful to human diseases such as malaria and Zika virus. They developed another technique called the incompatible insect technique, which essentially what these geneticists have been doing is they've been releasing males into the ecosystem with Wolbachia, which is it's like an intercellular bacterium which affects mating with males and females. The agricultural pest management has like a mathematical modeling towards all these studies, which can kind of look at just like the genetic design of the actual experiments that are carried out, the potential benefits, looks at the biological processing, and then predicts costs and appropriate health concerns. Some of the management methods that they were used were female lethal and male selecting could be in principle to help manage resistance to other control methods. And some of the primary things that they touched base on were the evolution, basically wanted to slow evolution through methods of high dosing and refuge strategy. What the high dosing does is it introduces this Bt protein, which kills the heterozygote alleles that are able to confer or resist, thus achieving a recessive allele. And the refuge part refers to the non-transgenic plants to serve as a safe harbor for these said insects, which will slow down the evolution of resistance and keeps insects' progeny heterozygote to be killed by toxins, and avoids homozygote population throughout. Some of the there was a bollworm and a corn earworm that were considered moderate dose pests, and they weren't all completely their heterozygotes weren't completely killed off in this scenario. So there are some tinkering that needs to be done with this particular technique, but for the most part, it seems like it's been pretty beneficial. From an economic standpoint, we're putting more money in now to be able to retain money in the long run, and that's where this sort of study is. That's its goal towards the end and the end product. The intrinsic resistance dilution is punitive. Resistant alleles, the built-in dilution can be sufficient to drive any resistance allele extinct before it reaches observable frequency. They talked, and then again they talked about some gene editing. Talked about CRISPR and how they approached it for mosquitoes. So it was able to suppress the vector population by affecting female fertility. By also, they had touched base on how they were able to, like earlier with the sterile technique, they were able to affect mature mosquitoes from being able to fly, so they weren't able to mate as well. But in their immature state, they were still able to, be pests towards what said crops or towards humans. But once they were able to get to a later stage in life, they became less of a pest, which is at least it's beneficial to an extent in the long run there. But again, back towards the CRISPR and the gene editing, these female fertility, they've been able to modify the population by spreading, particular traits that they want to be affected. They used it with the diamondback moths. They used this CRISPR genetic modifying technique as well. And then they talked about the interdisciplinary research from the theoretical standpoint to the lab and then into the eventual field on the big stage. They've been observing a lot of traits from behavioral traits such as mating habits, how many insects are targeted in the population, which is very important for the appropriate genetically modified ratio, because you want to be able to introduce a ratio that is not too high, so that you're not completely eliminating a species, but rather an appropriate ratio so that you suppress it, and then you can kind of cap it and keep an eye and observe how many heterozygotes are being developed and if the toxins are working to kill off the ones that are reproducing this resistant allele towards our crops, or towards the insecticides that go on the crops. In theory, I think that this is a beneficial way of going about our agricultural aspect of things. As far as I know, things have seemed healthy for humans up to this point. Otherwise they wouldn't have been implementing it and allowing it for our crops. So as long as they keep a close eye on that, a close cap on that, I'm all for the genetically modified insects being implemented. It seems like less chemicals in that perspective, and more of a natural mating process. And like essentially we're introducing, these artificial insects, which, produce with wild insects, and, thus we kind of kill off the resistant alleles that are being reproduced. So I'm for that. I think it's going to be economically beneficial and agriculturally beneficial in the long run. So thank you for listening, and that's all I had to say. Thank you.